Cliff Richard was one of Britain's biggest music stars for many years. Millions of people looked up to him and his career seemed almost impossible to break. But behind the hit songs, sold-out shows, and public smile is a story of loss, hard decisions, and events that changed his life forever. At 85, his journey doesn't look at all like what most people think it will be like. Plus, some of the hardest parts took place in the background. Come with us as we look more closely at Cliff Richard's life, the problems he quietly faced, and the real Cliff Richard that many people thought they knew. Lost before getting famous. Cliff Richard's life did not start out in the bright lights of music studios or show stages. He was just Harry Roger Webb before he became one of Britain's biggest music stars. He was a boy growing up in a family that would go through loss, uncertainty, and big changes. Cliff Richard has had a long career, but the things that made him who he is happened years before he had his first big hit. He was born in Lucknow, which was part of British India at the time, on the 14th of October, 1940. His father, Roger Oscar Webb, worked as a caterer for the Indian Railways, and his mother, Dorothy Marie Dasley, was from a Dutch Indian family that worked hard. When Harry was young, his life seemed to be pretty stable. But things changed when India's government became unstable. Because of the rising violence and the lack of certainty about the future, the Webb family chose to leave. In order to make their future safer, they packed up their things and went to England. It wasn't easy to start over. When the family moved to Britain, they didn't have much and had to get used to a whole new way of life. Everything was different, from the people they lived with, to the weather, to the culture. There wasn't much money, and life wasn't easy. They had to work hard just to get by, like many families who have just moved and are getting back on their feet. As a child, Harry learned that life wasn't easy, and that everyone in the family had to do their part. Even with those problems, he found something that made him happy, and gave him a reason to live. During his teenage years, Harry became interested in skiffle music, a style that was popular in Britain in the 1950s. He paid close attention to the music of the time, and wished he could play it himself. When a father saw his son's growing interest, he made a big choice. Hook got his first guitar from Roger when he was 16 years old. It looked like a simple gift, but it was one of the most important events in Harry's life. He could practice, get better, and start to think about a career in music with that guitar. Soon, he started a singing group at school, called the Quintones. Later, he joined the Dick Teague Skiffle group. These early performances gave him confidence and helped him learn the skills that would later make his career possible. Cliff Richard would later say nice things about his father and how he helped him when he was a teenager. He thought his dad saw how talented he was before anyone else did. Cliff used to say that his father had helped him get started. It's too bad that Roger Webb never got to see how successful his son would become. Cliff's career really took off after his father died, but it left him with a deep emotional wound. It's never easy to lose a parent at such a young age, but this time made it even worse. Cliff was just starting to go after his goals. But all of a sudden, one of the people who believed in him the most was gone. He finally admitted years later that the loss had never really gone away. It was just something he learned to deal with. Having to take care of more things after his father died, Cliff felt he had to take care of his family as the oldest boy. His mom still had to take care of her 3 younger daughters. And as Cliff's music career grew, he became a big help. He wasn't just trying to make it as a singer anymore. Besides that, he was trying to help the people he loved get by financially. Even after he became famous, he still felt responsible. Cliff didn't let his success change him in any way. He stayed careful, organized, and controlled. A lot of young stars liked the freedom that came with being famous, but he usually kept himself in check. He did some of that because he knew his family relied on him. When other people were counting on him to do well, he couldn't afford to lose focus. But while Cliff's work was at its peak, he had to make another tough choice that would affect the rest of his personal life. Fame over family. When Cliff Richard put out Move It in 1958, his life changed almost overnight. The upbeat rock and roll song gave people in Britain a new sound, and the young singer quickly became a national star. Cliff became Britain's own rock and roll star. At a time when American artists like Elvis Presley were hot on the charts, a lot of people rushed to buy his music. People screamed in the concert halls and his name spread all over the country. His success came quickly, but it also asked him to give up almost everything. His workload increased as his fame grew. Cliff did more than just make music. He was touring all the time, appearing on TV, making films, giving interviews, and going to public events. Each year brought a new record, concert tour, or movie project. He rarely took a break, so he didn't have much time for a normal personal life. A lot of people Cliff's age were starting families, getting married, and settling down, but Cliff was moving from city to city. It took him months to plan his days, and his personal life often had to fit around his work obligations. The thrill of success was real, but so were the costs that came with it. Getting to know someone for a long time was harder for him when he spent so much time away from home. As the years went by, getting married became less likely. It wasn't that Cliff didn't believe in love. Instead, he realized that the way he lived made it very hard to keep a marriage together. Being away for long amounts of time, being in public eye all the time, and putting work first all the time have made relationships harder to handle. One of Cliff's most well-known relationships was with Sue Barker, who used to be a tennis winner. Their relationship got a lot of attention from the media, and reporters closely tracked every public event they attended together. Many people thought it was only a matter of time before the wedding bells rang. People liked them, thought they were a good match, and thought they were successful in their own jobs. Cliff later said that he had really thought about asking Sue to marry him. He really cared about her, and the relationship wasn't just a one-night stand. He thought about it a lot, though, and realized he couldn't really make that lifelong promise. He came to the conclusion that his feelings for Sue were strong, but not strong enough for marriage, instead of making a promise he wasn't sure about. He thought it would be better to back out. He has said that he wouldn't have been good for either of them if he had proposed while he was still not sure. Cliff wrote about these choices in his book, My Life, My Way, many years later. He talked about how he had been in real love and had enjoyed deep relationships throughout his life. He did say, though, that marriage had never felt like the right thing for him. He thought that his job required a lot of dedication that would have been hard to balance with family life. Surprisingly, one of Cliff's first big hits was the happy song Bachelor Boy, which is about having fun before getting married. Not many people paid much attention to the term at the time. But as the years went by and Cliff still wasn't married, the song became more and more about his personal life. The name stuck with him everywhere. Interviewers kept asking him why he had never been married, and fans kept asking the same thing year after year. Cliff always gave polite answers, but the repeated questions never went away fully. People talked about his personal life as much as they talked about his music. Even though they were successful for decades, many interviews ended up going back to the same subject. Why had the most eligible man in Britain never started a family? As time went on, Cliff may have given his most honest explanation. He agreed that things in his life had gone by too quickly. The first recording session led to the next. After one music tour, there was another. Another chance came about because of the first one. The years had gone by before he knew it. With each passing decade, the family life he may have once dreamed of seemed further away. Another part of life that never happened was marriage. But what was coming next was a run of even more painful losses. Seeing people leave. Cliff Richard had a small group of people he could count on for most of his life. A lot of people knew him as a music star, but only his close friends and family knew the real person. But that circle got smaller over time. People who had been there for him at different times in his life were going one by one, leaving him to deal with a string of very personal losses. Dorothy, his mother, was a part of one of the hardest parts. She had been there for him from the start, cheering him on as he followed his dreams, and seeing him become one of Britain's biggest stars. But later in life, she was told she had Alzheimer's disease. A disease that slowly makes it harder to remember things and think clearly. Families often go through years of emotional pain as they watch someone they love slowly change because of Alzheimer's. Cliff stayed close to his sick mother the whole time. As her illness got worse, he spent years visiting her and taking care of her while still working full-time. When that person has been such an important part of your life, seeing them slowly lose their memories breaks your heart. There were times when Dorothy didn't recognize her well-known son. Cliff felt a lot of pain during those times. The woman who had been important in his life couldn't remember many of the things they had done together. Since she was sick for more than 10 years, her family had to deal with this quiet sadness for years before she died. Cliff had been mentally ready for Dorothy's death for a long time before she died in 2007. Still, losing his mother was another big event that changed everything. Even though she was no longer in pain, the void she felt could not be easily filled. Someone else who believed in him before anyone else knew his name had died. Even though that time was hard, there would be more sadness to come. Cliff's sister Donna died suddenly in 2016, which was another painful loss. The time of the event made it even harder to accept. Just a few weeks ago, Cliff was finally cleared of the false abuse claims that had been making the news for almost 2 years. Donna was one of his biggest fans during that long and tiring court case. A lot of people questioned him in public, but she stood by his side the whole time. During one of the worst times in Cliff's life, having a family member who always believed in him gave him a lot of emotional strength. Donna's support helped him get through months of stress, doubt, and public scrutiny. That he lost her so soon, after his name was finally cleared, made things even worse. Just as things were getting better, someone else he loved disappeared out of the blue. Another person Cliff lost was someone who had become more than just a business partner. William Lamb, his close friend and former boss, was always in his life for more than 30 years. For many years they lived together in Sunnydale with Bill's mother and then Cliff's mother when she was sick. The way they were arranged showed how close they had grown over the years. Cliff lost someone who had been a part of his life for decades when Bill died in 2022. In contrast to many public appearances where he carefully concealed his feelings, Cliff was honest about how much the loss hurt him. It was another reminder that the people who had been on his journey with him in the past were slowly leaving. However, Cliff was still not ready for the public experience that almost destroyed everything he had worked so hard to build over the years. What a mess. Cliff Richard worked hard for many years to build one of the most prestigious careers in British show business. Lots of scandals happened around celebrities, but he stayed out of them. He worked hard to keep his professional image and his personal life in good shape. But almost overnight in 2014, everything changed. The investigation that didn't lead to any charges would be the worst time of his life, leaving him with emotional scars that he says will never fully heal. The trouble started in August 2014, while Cliff was on vacation in Portugal. He was taking it easy away from the spotlight when police searched his home in Berkshire as part of a probe into a claim of past abuse. Cliff wasn't even in the country when the raid happened. He didn't just hear about it in his own time. The search became national news. The way the story was told made the event even more shocking. People all over the UK watched live TV as cops searched Cliff's house. Helicopters flew above and cameras caught police officers entering and leaving the house. Since the BBC showed the raid live, millions of people thought that something very important had already been proven. This was terrible for Cliff. He hadn't been arrested yet, but the live coverage made an image of him that was hard to get rid of. As you might expect, a lot of people thought that since the cops were involved, he must have done something wrong. In fact, the study had just begun. He hadn't been charged with anything and the court hadn't found him guilty of anything. But people's views had already begun to change. The probe went on for almost 2 years. At that time, Cliff's life was full of doubt. Every new headline kept the story going, but every time it took longer, it got harder for him to move forward. He helped the police in every way, but he couldn't change how long the process would take or what people thought about him. While the investigation was going on, Cliff was never jailed or charged with a crime. After some time, prosecutors decided there wasn't enough proof to charge him, and the case was closed. Legally, he was clear of all charges, but his bad name had already been known all over the world by that time. It had a huge effect on my emotions. Cliff later said that he felt like his whole life had been put on hold. Having worry that never went away was hard for him. He had trouble sleeping because he couldn't stop thinking about the case. He told them that the study was something he thought about every morning when he woke up and every night before he went to sleep. His health was also affected by the stress. Cliff said he lost weight because the stress of the situation got too much for him. At times, he thought that his constant worry might be hurting his heart badly. He spent decades building his success, but he couldn't enjoy it because he was worried about how much of it might go away because of a claim that had never been proven. The fear didn't just go away when the investigation was over. Cliff said that doing normal things was a lot harder than it used to be. Going out in public no longer felt like normal. He sometimes wondered if strangers knew who he was because of his music or the news stories they had read. He wondered if people were still thinking about whether the accusations were true even though the case had been dropped. Cliff went to court against the BBC because it showed the police raid live. He did this to protect his image and his right to privacy. The case turned into one of the biggest privacy fights in British media history in the past few years. Cliff was found not guilty by the High Court in 2018, which said that the BBC had broken his privacy by showing the search before any charges were made. He was given a lot of money in damages, and the decision was seen as a major victory for privacy rights. But after getting through the worst crisis of his life, Cliff still had to deal with another problem that would quietly shape the rest of his later years. The cost of living is not the same. Cliff Richard did something that surprised a lot of people in the music business when he was at the height of his early success. By the middle of the 1960s, he was one of Britain's 60 seconds. He was one of Britain's biggest stars, with hit songs, concerts that sold out, and more fans around the world. The goal of most entertainers in his position was to become even more famous. But Cliff had a very different thought in his mind. Cliff became a Christian for the first time in 1964, when he was only 24 years old. His faith changed many of the choices he made in his personal and work life and became an important part of his life. His career as a musician never ended fully, but he did say that he thought about doing that many times. Cliff had an idea that he might quit the entertainment business and become a missionary or a teacher. Through his religion, he wanted to spend his whole life helping other people. For someone whose career was at its peak, it was a great idea. The level of success Cliff had already reached is something that most artists work hard to reach. He was ready to give it up, though, if he thought it was the right thing to do. He chose to keep making music in the end. However, his faith stayed with him. Instead of switching jobs, he changed how he did the one he had. He became more careful about the jobs he took on and how he appeared to the public. It was his views that affected the music he made, the shows he put on, and how he behaved on and off the stage. Cliff stood out from many other artists of his time because he made this choice. In the 1960 seconds and 1970 seconds, the music business often praised bad behavior, wild parties, and news stories that were controversial. A lot of well-known artists built their careers around that way of life. Cliff went in a different direction. He didn't do many of the things that were often written about in gossip pages. Instead, he was known for being polite, living a disciplined life, and having strong personal morals. He had one of the best music jobs in British history. But it wasn't enough to fill all the gaps in his life. Nothing there. Cliff Richard's work has been amazing in almost every way. Not many artists are popular for more than a few years, but Cliff was popular for more than 60 years. He became one of the most famous musicians in British history, sold millions of records around the world, and kept performing long after many of his peers had stopped. But there was a deeper truth behind all of those accomplishments. Professional success could mean praise, awards, and a safe income, but it might not always lead to the personal connections that many people make on their own over the course of their lives. Cliff's career took off when he released Move It in 1958. But what really stands out about his career is not how fast it began, but how long it lasted. Over the years, music styles have changed many times. Pop, disco, new wave, and many other styles came after rock and roll. Artists from different generations came and went. Cliff learned how to deal with everything, while keeping the things that made people love him in the first place. He became well known in the 960 seconds with hits like Living Doll, The Young Ones, and Summer Holiday. He kept making popular music for many more years, with hits like Devil Woman, We Don't Talk Anymore, and Wired for Sound. Over time, songs like Mistletoe and Wine and Savior's Day became holiday favorites for many families in Britain. With each new story, he proved that he could change with the times and still be recognized as Cliff Richard. His accomplishments are hard to beat. Cliff has sold about 250 million records around the world over the course of his career. He became the first act in the history of the UK charts to have an album in the top 5 in 8 different decades. This amount of consistency is very rare in popular music. A lot of singers only have one successful time, but Cliff built a career that helped people of all ages. It looked like a life that a lot of people would love to have from the outside. He performed all over the world for huge crowds, was knighted, and became one of Britain's most famous entertainers. But success often hides the things that people have to give up to get it. A lot of the people Cliff grew up with were building different kinds of lives, while Cliff was making albums and going on international tours. As they got married, had kids, and celebrated birthdays together, they started family rituals that would last for decades. Cliff's calendar looked very different. He often planned his days around rehearsals, TV appearances, recording sessions, and long stays away from home. After some time, Cliff stated that his fame made it harder for him to trust people. Because she was one of the most recognizable people in the country, almost every relationship got a lot of attention. At times, it was tough to tell if someone really cared about him, or just liked the famous person everyone else saw. Being in the public eye all the time naturally made barriers that most people never have to think about. He has been very honest about how hard it was to make permanent connections while living such a strange life. Constant travel made it hard to be stable, and fame made it harder and harder to be alone. Even when real relationships started to form, he often couldn't keep them going because his job needed a lot of time and consistency. No amount of awards or record sales could fix these issues. As the years went by, getting older brought a whole new set of problems that not even a famous job could stop. Away from the attention. Just getting to your 80s is an accomplishment. Very few artists are able to keep making music, putting out albums, and performing in front of crowds at that age. Cliff Richard has never been happy just remembering how successful he was in the past. This man has worked in the music business for over 60 years and still does because music is an important part of his life. After a long career, a lot of performers decide to quit, but Cliff has always found a way to stay busy. Recording new music, going on TV, and playing live whenever he can are all things he has kept up. Even though the demands of performing have grown much harder as he has aged, his desire to entertain has never gone away totally. At the same time, Cliff has been incredibly open about what it's really like to get older in the entertainment business. He doesn't act like things are the same as they were when he was younger. Instead, he's been honest about how age changes both the performer and the business. In an interview in 2025, Cliff was honest about a problem that could no longer be ignored. He said that because he was getting old, many radio stations stopped playing his music. He didn't sound mad or upset about it. He didn't fight it. Instead, he saw it as how the music business works today. Radio stations today tend to play music by younger artists because they want to get younger listeners. Cliff knew that was the truth, even though it was sad to see it for himself. His comments brought up a problem that a lot of experienced performers eventually have to deal with. The business world starts looking elsewhere at some point, no matter how great someone has been. Every year, new artists come out. As people get older, their musical tastes change, and the media naturally turns its attention to younger people. It's impossible for an artist as successful as Cliff Richard to completely avoid these changes. That doesn't mean his fans aren't still around. Many people who have been following his career for decades still back him. People who go to concerts still like hearing the songs that they grew up with. But Cliff knows that it gets harder and harder to keep up the same amount of mainstream attention year after year. Getting older has also brought about physical problems that can't be ignored. Touring used to feel like nothing special, but now it takes a lot more energy. It gets harder and harder to handle long trips, practices, and shows every night. Cliff has admitted that travel is a lot harder now than it was when he was younger. A singer cares about one thing more than almost anything else: hearing. Cliff has been honest about the fact that he wakes up some mornings, not sure if his voice will work the way he wants it to. That uncertainty is hard to deal with for someone whose job has depended on singing for more than 65 years. No matter how much knowledge he has, he can't fully control it. A lot of his fans are also surprised by how cool and honest he is when he talks about death. Cliff has not tried to avoid the subject. Instead, he has admitted that the future is not certain for someone his age. He once said, "I might be dead next year, so I don't even think about it anymore," for an interview. The comment wasn't meant to be dramatic. Truthfully, it showed the thoughts of a man who knows that time grows more valuable with age. Even though these things are true, Cliff has worked hard to stay healthy. He has been known for his disciplined habits all his life, and they are still with him today. He is very careful about what he eats, works out often, and still likes to play tennis. Being physically active has helped him keep up the energy he needs to perform for a lot longer than most people thought he would. If you liked this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to get more interesting stories about your favorite stars' lives.